What if Eve never ate the forbidden fruit? Imagine the Garden of Gardens, dew beating on the edges of leaves like a necklace of stars, the river veining the soil with glassy streams, and a wind so gentle it seemed to hum in tune with a heart that knew no fear. Now imagine a hand that hesitates. Imagine the fruit, luminous and strange, reflecting a human face that is still unbroken by shame, and the whisper that presses in from the edges of the world. What if she turned away? What if the first no to temptation was the root note of humanity's entire song? Tonight, we open a door to a story that did not happen, but could have been imagined, and walk through together with care. First, the story as it's told. The book of Genesis paints a world beginning in breath and blessing. A garden is planted, Eden, set in the east, with the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil at its heart. Humanity, made in the image of God, is placed there to tend, to name, to steward. One boundary is given. Do not eat from the tree that divides good from evil. A serpent, subtle and shimmering with insinuation, speaks to Eve, raising questions that bend her trust. She eats. Adam eats. Their eyes are open to a knowledge that hits the body more like a bruise than a light bulb. Shame arrives like a sudden cold, and they hide. The consequences are heavy and generational. Toil, pain, tangled relationships, and exile from the garden. A flaming sword stands between them and the tree of life. From that moment on, the world is told as a story of wandering, yearning, and the long ache for return. That is the story many of us know, even if we learned it more through art and whispers than scripture. It's been interpreted through centuries of thought, sometimes harshly, sometimes with aching tenderness, as a story of loss, choice, and the strange mix of freedom and consequence. Now comes the wondering we do together, respectfully, imaginatively. What if it had gone another way? What if the serpent's syllables were no match for Eve's grounded trust? What if she listened, considered, and then lowered the fruit gently back beneath the leaves, letting the sun warm it for another day that would never come? In our alternate timeline, the air suspends in a deeper calm. Eve looks from the serpent to the garden keeper's path and calls across the trees for Adam. They stand together, and in their standing, the serpent's sentence loses shape. Eve remembers the gift before the rule, the nearness before the doubt. She speaks out loud the boundary that had been set for their care, and in hearing her own words, finds strength in them. The serpent flickers, dissatisfied, and slips back into the thicket. No fruit is taken. No veil drops like a net. Their breath remains easy. Their bodies remain unburdened by shame. The afternoon turns toward evening, and when the presence walks the garden in the cool of the day, they do not hide. They talk. From this moment of patient trust flows a world with different currents. Humanity's first lesson about knowledge is not that it must be seized, but that it will be given in time. The garden is not a cage. It is a classroom. The teacher is near, not distant, and each day presents new things to name, new patterns to notice, new rhythms of care to practice. The tree of knowledge is not an enemy looming over them, but a boundary marking a season that has not yet arrived. Their dignity is not in possessing all secrets, but in walking with the one who knows them. What grows in such a world? Let us imagine the first children, not born into exile, but into the steady cadence of a place that is safe enough to be brave. Without a wound at the world's beginning, instruction takes the form of stories and games, not rules shouted across a chasm. The young play with light, with shadows, with the way water divides into droplets on their fingertips, and they ask a million questions. Curiosity is welcomed like a song that everyone knows the words to. When they don't understand something, they ask, and the answer often begins with, "Let's go look." There is work here, real work. The garden wants hands. Vines must be trained along arbor and stone. Soil must be turned and rested. Fruit must be harvested and shared, saved and planted. But the work is partnership instead of punishment. Sweat becomes a sign of belonging, not a scar of exile. Tools are made from stone and wood with a care that acknowledges they are extensions of a promise. To tend, not to dominate. To coax, not to crush. Do they ever eat from the tree of life? The text hints that the reason for exile was to keep the first humans from eating and living forever in a broken state. Here, without the break, that question rests in a different light. Perhaps the tree of life is received not like a pill, but like a sacrament. Life is shared in measures, seasons of years that stretch generously, lifespans shaped by wisdom and wonder rather than fear of running out. Aging is not decay, but deepening. The lines on a face, the handwriting of decades learning how to love. Art arrives early. Without the need to cover shame, clothing becomes ceremonial, playful, expressive. Woven leaves for festivals, soft fibers dyed with the colors they learned from the birds. Music is the first language after laughter. Bone flutes, the hum of taut strings, drums that carry heartbeat across the rivered valleys. Stories pile up like bright stones around the evening fire. They tell the one about the day the crane taught them the dance of balance, about the time the storm bent the trees into arcs that whispered numbers. They keep a calendar by the migration of light across the garden's standing stones, not to count down toward an end, but to count up toward anniversaries of gratitude. And what of knowledge of good and evil? That crisp distinction that came too soon in the old timeline. It arrives like sunrise instead of lightning. Children learn right and wrong from living examples, from seeing kindness repair what mistakes fray. The wound of shame does not teach them, the warmth of trust does. When someone errs, and they do, because free will without scars is still free will, there is correction without condemnation. A child who breaks a branch in impatience learns how to bind and graft, to heal what was thought ruined. Forgiveness becomes a daily craft, not a courtroom drama. Civilization grows outward like rings in a tree trunk. Eden is not fortified with fear. It graduates its caretakers into wider lands. They travel in seasons, not as exiles but as gardeners on mission, learning the patterns of other soils, listening to new winds. The world beyond the garden is not empty. Wild places teem with creatures that do not share human speech. Mountains etch their names into the sky. Deserts test the heart's attention. The first cities arise not to protect wealth from enemies, but to cluster expertise around learning. Water, agriculture, medicine, song. Leadership is chosen like choosing a conductor for a symphony, the one who listens most closely and can bring all the instruments into a shared piece. Law exists, but it grows from responsibility, not fear. Instead of codes bristling with punishments, instruction is woven into ritual and habit. You learn justice by doing justice, distributing harvest with an eye for the vulnerable, repairing tools and paths for neighbors before the festival, keeping the waterways clear because every fish is a future song. The sacred is not a wall around a place, but a way you walk through every place. Temples, where they exist, look like greenhouses, with roof lines that lift to welcome in light. Now, a tender question. If the rupture never happened, what becomes of the later longings we associate with healing and redemption? In this speculative world, the holy does not become distant. The voice that walked in the cool of the day keeps walking. Sometimes that voice speaks through a person who listens more deeply than most. A teacher whose parables are growing instructions more than rescue flares. People gather to hear not how to be saved from a wrath they inherited, but how to deepen a harmony they already taste. Festivals of remembrance make no room for guilt's theater. Instead, they rehearse gratitude and recommitment, laughter and lifelong learning. The stories we call prophetic become invitations to better care, warnings against forgetfulness, songs of courage when laziness whispers that entropy is good enough. Does suffering exist in this timeline? That is a question we must approach with soft steps. The world still has weather. Lightning still walks the sky. Gravity can still misjudge a step at the cliff's edge. But suffering here is not compounded by cruelty. We do not make disasters out of disagreements. We do not sharpen our fears into blades. Mourning happens. The old eventually return to the earth they tended. But grief is the community's workbench, not a solitary pit. People sit together. They cook. They tell the story of the person in a way that does not hide the rough edges but polishes them into lessons. They plant a tree. War, in the way we know it, never gathers its heavy clouds. There are conflicts, yes, because choice is still real, and desires tangle. But the means to destroy on a massive scale never develop the same way, because the logic of domination is not a central story. When a group hoards water, the neighboring settlement does not raise an army, It raises engineers and mediators. They build canals. They share rights. They set up seasons of rest for the land so that the future doesn't arrive thirsty. The songs of victory in this world are about the day the dam opened, the day the bridge held, the day pride became hospitality. Trade is different too. Currency exists, but its primary symbol is not kings, not conquest. The coin you give might depict a tree or a hand planting a seed. Wealth is measured by the number of apprentices you keep, the number of shared meals that cross your table each week, the freshness of your wells. Markets are noisy, colorful, and joyful. But underneath the bargaining is a liturgy of exchange. May this thing that left my care thrive in yours. What about science? About the sharp, beautiful edge of knowing the world's workings? It thrives. There is no fear of inquiry when curiosity is not a rebellion, but a devotion. People learn to read the book of the stars with a delight that does not empty them of reverence. In this timeline, the first great observatory is built like a wind harp, its ribs tuned to the movements of the night so that the planets sing their positions. Medicine grows from observation and tenderness. Healing is not just fixing, but restoring a person to their circle, their work, their meaning. Around the mid-horizon of our history, something wonderful happens. The garden's graduates attempt their most ambitious project, bringing the garden's principles to places that have never known such gentle hands. In the old timeline, a tower once symbolized pride and confusion. Here, a different monument rises, a living library, terraces of fruiting trees and reflecting pools aligned to the sun, where travelers from anywhere can come, learn soil and sky, and take seeds home. Languages multiply not as a barrier but as an orchard, each tongue a new fruit with flavors that make the feast richer. Now a pause, with a question for you. If humanity never fell, what's the first tradition or invention you imagine we'd create together? Something that feels true to a garden-shaped world? Share your idea in the comments. Your inventions might inspire someone else's. And if this kind of gentle what-if is your cup of tea, stay with us for more. And consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter of this series. With your imagination alongside ours, let's walk a little further. Imagine holidays. Instead of days rooted in deliverance from catastrophe, the biggest festival is the first dawn, commemorating the moment each generation's children reach the age where they walk the garden alone, listening for the voice that still comes at twilight. Another holy day marks the naming, when communities gather to choose titles for new constellations, celebrating how the sky and our stories keep speaking to each other. And there is the quiet night, where no music is played and the only sound is the wind through the reeds. Families sit under the canopy of leaves and practice listening, a skill every community protects like a treasure. How does art look as the centuries pass without the old wound? Paintings love faces that grow older. The lines of age are counterpoint to younger light, and portraits often include hands at work, a mother tying vine to trellis, a grandfather teaching a child to see frog eggs as galaxies in a bowl. Sculpture favors flowing materials, wood, water, light itself, pieces that move a little when you move. The human form is celebrated in dignity without worship or exploitation. Nudity exists without voyeurism, draped where warmth requires it, uncovered where sunlight is also a teacher. In education, schools are built as gardens, literally. The classroom has a resident tree. Lessons happen in cycles that begin with wonder, move into pattern, then practice, then rest. Exams are not about catching you not knowing. They are moments where the community watches you teach something you've learned, because teaching is considered the proof of understanding. Literacy arises early because stories are how communities remember. Each child copies the creation poem, then writes their first addendum, a line or two about a leaf, a river, a friend. Multiple generations write on the same scroll, layered like rings of an oak. We must also consider technology's arc. Without the drive to dominate or the anxiety of scarcity, technological progress still marches, but it prefers integration over extraction. Power is drawn from the same rivers that feed the fields, using channels that don't leave land gashed. The first engines are patient, turning slowly like old millstones, then more efficiently as understanding deepens. There is a threshold they agree not to cross. Any machine that breaks the bond of responsibility toward land, neighbor, or the yet unborn is rethought or retired. Debate is vigorous because curiosity loves to run. Wisdom loves to tune. A council of makers, growers, healers, and storytellers meets in a hall that smells of cedar, and their vote carries moral weight because it's earned by service, not status. Spiritual life remains center stage without theatrics. Pilgrimage is less about reaching a far shrine, and more about visiting places of work that changed the world. The first garden replanted after a fire, the bridge that taught a river to carry boats and fish equally, the hall where a stubborn dispute resolved into a new tradition of listening. There are sacred texts, and they are read with joy and argument, because the argument here is a form of love, both sides committed to truth's slow unveiling. The voice in the garden is still heard in many ways, through dreams, through guides, through a moment when a stranger's kindness lands like a messenger's feather. Relationships. Oh, how different they are when the first relationship did not shatter. Marriage is less a contract protecting two people from the world, and more a promise to serve the world together. Singleness carries honor because it is another way to be available for the community's needs. Kinship spills beyond blood. Adoption is common, not because of catastrophe, but because love is more alive when it's busy. Boundaries are clear without being cruel. Consent is as natural as breathing, a language taught before verbs. What of death? The question that rubs against even the gentlest stories. In this world, death is not an enemy to be mocked or a door to be kicked down with bravado. It is a winter in a world of seasons. People die older, yes, and often gently, but they still die. The sting here is less, not because life is cheaper, but because it is stewarded. At the approach of the end, a person spends weeks visiting, teaching their last lessons, bequeathing tools to those who will use them well, asking forgiveness and giving it like breath. Their final day is often beneath the tree that was part of their life's work. The community sings them home. Children watch, not traumatized, but taught. They learn that joy's roots run through all seasons, and that to be human is to love well in a world that eventually asks for everything back. If we bring this story all the way to our modern edge, we find a planet that still spins with storms and surprises, but where the sky is not scratched by the smoke of wars. There are still mistakes, lazy years, seasons when people forget the garden's ways and have to be called back by someone who remembers. But the garden's grammar remains the language of the heart. Cities have green spines. Rivers still talk. A person can travel to the place where the first refusal was made, where a woman and a man chose trust over fear, and find there a simple marker. Not a throne, not a gate, just a stone carved with a question that every generation answers again in their way. What is knowledge for? And if you listen in that place when the evening cool arrives, you can hear a story being told to new ears. It is the story of a serpent who once whispered that trust was naive, that wisdom was a theft worth risking, that the quick, sharp bite is better than the slow feast. It is the story of a woman who saw through it, the first philosopher, the first poet of patience, the first to say that the highest knowledge is not knowing everything at once, but learning in relationship. Of course, this is our speculation, a careful exercise, not doctrine. It asks us what it would mean to live as if the garden's door was never locked, as if every threshold we cross could be walked with tenderness. Now we return to our own world, pockets full of seeds from a garden that never closed. What do we do with them? We plant them in the places where our lives have grown dry. We water with attention. We weed with humility. We listen to elders whose faces are maps of seasons. We mend what we can. We make art that honors work, and work that feels like art. We teach children to ask questions without fear, and to receive answers without arrogance. We keep a small ritual at dusk, stepping outside, even for a minute, to remember that wisdom likes to walk when the day cools, and that the truest knowledge isn't a trophy, but a friendship. This imagined world doesn't erase pain, nor does it scold the way history actually ran. It simply invites us to hold a mirror to ourselves and ask what we might choose today if trust took the lead. Even if the garden gate in the old story closed, gardens can be planted in the city's cracks. Even if shame showed up early, forgiveness can show up earlier tomorrow. The hard work of tending, of bodies, neighbors, land, can still be partnership instead of punishment if we decide together that it will be. The first note of temptation can still become the root note of our song, whenever we honor boundaries born of love. So we close where we began, in a place where dew collects like jewels and a fruit hangs heavy with possibility. The power of this what-if isn't to reshape the past, but to re-enchant the present. Eve didn't take the fruit in our tale, and so we are returned to a question with a smile behind it. What then will we choose to grow?